The night was quiet in Columbus, New Mexico, until the gunfire began. On March 9, 1916, hundreds of Mexican raiders stormed across the border, setting buildings ablaze, gunning down civilians, and looting everything in sight. By dawn, 18 Americans were dead, and the attackers had vanished back into the desert. Their leader, Pancho Villa. It was the first time in modern history that a foreign force had invaded U.S. soil. The country demanded revenge. President Woodrow Wilson gave the order, "Find Villa, kill him." The man chosen for the job was General John Blackjack Pershing, a soldier who had never lost a fight. Within weeks he led nearly 5,000 men deep into Mexico, determined to hunt Villa down. But Villa was no ordinary enemy. He knew the land, he knew how to disappear. And as Pershing's men pursued him across brutal deserts and towering mountains, they soon realized they weren't just chasing Villa, they were walking into a war. 2 weeks after the attack, Pershing led 4,800 troops across the border into Mexico. Among them were the legendary Buffalo Soldiers, battle-hardened cavalrymen who had fought in wars from the Great Plains to Cuba. There were also seasoned frontiersmen, expert trackers, and young soldiers eager to prove themselves. But there was one problem. This was not a war. Mexico's government, though furious at Villa, did not welcome American troops on their soil. Pershing's men had to move without support, without resupply, and without reinforcements. They were deep in hostile territory, where both Villa's forces and the Mexican army could turn against them at any moment. And Villa was always one step ahead. His knowledge of the land was unmatched. He moved through mountains, deserts, and thick forests with ease, disappearing into the wilderness before the Americans could reach him. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he was gone. Weeks turned into months. Supplies ran low. The heat was unbearable during the day, the nights freezing cold. They fought off disease, exhaustion, and relentless ambushes from Villa's loyal fighters. Still, they pressed on. And then, in June 1916, a scout brought news. Villa's men were camped near the town of Carrizal. It was their best chance yet. Pershing sent Captain Charles Boyd and a small detachment of Buffalo Soldiers to intercept them. What happened next would change everything. As dawn broke over the desert, Captain Boyd and his men approached the town. The dust of their horses' hooves rose in the golden light. Then they saw them, Villa's men, hundreds of them, waiting just outside the town. Boyd's orders were clear: engage. The first shots rang out, echoing across the barren landscape. The fight was brutal. The Buffalo Soldiers fought fiercely, their rifles cracking in rapid succession. They held their ground, but the enemy kept coming. Then, a new sound. A horn. Mexican federal troops were arriving, but instead of aiding the Americans, they joined Villa's forces. Boyd realized too late they had been lured into a trap. The battlefield became a slaughter. Bullets tore through the air as Villa's men and the Mexican army closed in from all sides. Boyd fought to the end, refusing to surrender. He was shot down, his body falling into the dust. His men were either killed or captured. News of the disaster reached Pershing the next day. The hunt for Villa had just become something much bigger. The US and Mexico now stood on the brink of all-out war. For months, Pershing tried to continue the mission, but the political situation had changed. Mexico's government, furious at the incursion, demanded that the Americans leave. Tensions escalated and both nations prepared for war. By early 1917, Washington called Pershing back. The United States was on the verge of joining World War I, and they could no longer afford to chase Villa. Pershing and his men returned home, having fought one of the most grueling campaigns in U.S. history. And Villa, he lived. He faded into legend, eventually striking a deal with the Mexican government years later. He would retire from fighting until his enemies assassinated him in 1923. The men who rode with Pershing were never honored. There were no medals, no parades, no pages in history books, but their mission shaped the future of warfare. Pershing took what he learned in Mexico, the tactics, the survival, the relentless pursuit of an enemy, and used it to train the next generation of American soldiers. 2 years later, he would lead them to victory in World War I. And the men who rode through the deserts of Mexico, they became the foundation for modern special forces. They were the first of their kind, and though history may have forgotten them, their legacy remains.